AP Lit. We're talking about Red Badge of Courage. Go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say that I am a little irritated with Henry and how he can't make up his mind. I think his thoughts are very scattered and he doesn't know which day he wants to retreat or if he wants to go into battle. And I just added more to that in these chapters. And then with the tattered soldier, he just kept following him around and just being like, just kept asking him the same question, just kept following him everywhere he went. And
The tattered soldier did that, right.
and so it kind of reminded me of like, it could be kind of alluding to like Henry's thoughts, how they're scattered and they keep following him everywhere and keep making him make decisions, but not like firm decisions, kind of. So it's kind of interesting.
And I think you can put that in the context of growing up. It's a part of the allegory of this book is someone growing from childhood, boyhood to manhood. That would certainly be a part of it, not knowing who you are and questioning over and over. We'll just kind of go back and forth, go to that, go to Sarah.
I just think it's funny that like the people around Henry are maturing. Like Wilson, like knows what he wants to do now, and he's mature. And like Henry becomes like this joke in his regiment, and it still just doesn't seem to click with him that like he needs to like get his act together. Like you would think like after becoming the joke of everyone and like your best friend maturing and seeing all these deaths and stuff that you would like think like it might be time to grow up, but he still hasn't.
When you say joke, he will become one,
Yeah.
but they don't know that he is yet. They don't know that he ran away. At least he doesn't know yet. He begins, it's when he gets back, he begins to sense out. He makes that statement about if you do your deeds in the dark, you're still a man. So he's still trying to feel things out. And a lot of things help that process, like help protect him. The wound, for instance, helped him. Emily.
I really liked the author's writing style. Actually, I found it the most engaging of the books that we've read so far. Also, it made me think of Lord of the Flies, and when Henry came across the corpse in the forest, and they kind of locked eyes, and it was this, pardon me, it was a literal dead stare. And it reminded me of in the Lord of the Flies when Simon came across the pig's head on the spear, and it was almost like the spear spoke to him. And I felt like the experience of seeing this corpse really spoke to Henry of what it is to die in a war, and how different it is to die at home in your bed at the age of 86 or whatever.
Right.
And his trying to affirm his leaving the battlefield by saying, well, the squirrel ran away, so that means that it's perfectly fine for me to run away. That was irritating.
Yeah.
I got really ticked off at him.
A little bit of difference between a squirrel and a human being.
That reminded me, was Henry drafted?
No, he enlisted.
Well, then I'm just thinking the whole time, well, then why are you here if you're
Right.
willing to run?
Yeah, he doesn't know himself, right? He doesn't know what he wants. You and Willow was talking about that. Avery.
I was just gonna agree with what Willa said partly. I really don't like Henry. He's just like, he always changes his mind and he's just a coward. And it seems like he kind of makes everything about himself. Like, the way he justifies his decisions are really silly and foolish, but he's always like, well, I'll change my mind for this because it'll make me look better, and this is why I did it for me, and it's never about what's gonna happen to the rest of his regiment or the army. It's just all about him. But I do think it kind of like makes you look at human nature and just how we always picture like how incredibly brave and sacrificial that soldiers are, which they are, but also they are human as well. So he has like this self preservation as well.
So you're saying, although he's very inconsistent in some ways, you're saying that he's very consistent in his ultimate goal is, I don't know how you put it, but to look good in the eyes of other people, to feel good about himself. That's very consistent. He just changes what's going to make me achieve that. It changes from point to point. Colleen, did you have something?
Oh, yeah, I did. I was just, throughout reading this, I kept thinking about, well, yeah, this is very childish. And then I was like, oh, it makes sense, because like you said, it's about a boy coming out of boyhood and growing up and facing the real world, I guess you could say. And there's, I guess part of him feels like he wants to hold on to that little kid part of him,
And I think all this is very, very consistent with what we know about growing up and how we don't want to grow up. Yet we do. We want to be a teenager, but we don't want to lose and so forth. So what I'm hearing is we're seeing this psychological makeup of someone who's in that process. Yeah, Clay.
I thought that it was interesting, the imagery of the battles, like describing like all the dead bodies and everything, is like contrast to some of like the soldiers speaking. So like the guy with the cheery voice and everything, and they seemed like it was like their job to do this. It was just kind of different than like the way it was narrated.
So the narrator's voice is different from the soldier's voice. I don't know if you remember, we talked about that earlier. That's because it makes the narrator it can make him credible, because he's learned, he's educated, he has a broad view of things. The average soldier on the ground, not only not educated as well, but they don't have that broad view. I mean, they're in the fog of war, the literal fog of war. They can't see much beyond, just the people around them. They don't know what's going on. Yeah, Meg.
I don't know what Avery said. I think, like, it was interesting that he was very selfish, but also he admitted to it. Like, at one point he said something about how he's like the most selfish man in the world.
Are you talking about Wilson?
Henry.
You're saying Henry's honest?
He's not. He's very selfish, but at one point he even said that he was selfish. He admitted to it, which I thought was strange, and then he just continued to be that way.
Probably a good sign, though. If he's gonna grow up, he's gotta recognize that he's. Thank you. Yeah, Kimberly.
I just thought it was interesting how, like, throughout the book, like, Henry always needs people to approve of him.
Yeah.
And then, like, either his mother or, like, his friends. And then when he was in the woods after he ran away, he didn't have anybody, so he looked to a squirrel. And, like, the squirrel, like, he, like, figured out a way for it to approve of him.
Yeah, use that. I don't know if anybody, I don't wanna steal anybody's thought, but, is that before he saw the corpse. Just think about the significance of the corpse, where it was, and how Henry reacted to it. And you could argue literally was a turning point in the story, because he's running as far away from the front lines as possible. When he sees the corpse, he tries to run as far away from the corpse as possible, which brings him right back to the front lines. He unconsciously, he's running back to the thing that caused him to run away. Liam.
Well, this seems like another one of those stories, kind of like All the King's Men, where there's not really a protagonist that you root for, that who's like the good guy. Nobody in the book is that good. And even Henry and Jack Burton share a lot of similarities, where they don't own up to their problem. At least right away, they don't own up to their problems. They don't face their problems head on, but they try and like back away from them while still trying to maintain the image that they have to everybody else.
So any book, any story that honestly looks at growing up and responsibility, it sounds like but you're not gonna be responsible unless you admit to certain things, if you step running. You gotta stop. See, like both books eventually say that. You can't run forever. You got to face this thing, which is what Henry's gonna have to do. Yeah.
I sort of feel bad for Henry in a way.
Finally, some sympathy for him.
But they describe him as a youth, right? He's always described as a youth, so
Yeah.
he's obviously not an adult.
Right.
So he's probably, by the way he acts, probably what, like 16, 17 maybe?
Probably
So-
more 17, 18, yeah.
He's obviously not like fully matured yet,
Right.
because he's so like inconsistent with his decision
Sure.
making. And he, like, I think what a lot of this story is trying to do is sort of break down a lot of the, sort of, I feel like a lot of times, especially with, like, young boys, I guess, like, you romanticize, like, enlisting to fight in a war, because you think it's like it's patriotic and you're going to fight for your country. And a lot of times they do it like I think Henry did it because not only was like all the other brave boys in town doing it or whatever, but he sort of had an obligation as like a young boy that like was, you know, physically fit. But you never, especially when you're enlisting, like, and you have barely any training and you're going in without like any knowledge of what's actually gonna happen, you never know how you are gonna react in that sort of situation. So I think what the story's trying to do is sort of break down a lot of the stigmas about like war, and trying to drive home the fact that not everyone is built to fight for their country, sort of.
Well, I like your summary. That was very helpful to summarize kind of where we are in the story. And you said something, I have to come back to it. There's something else I wanted to point out, but that was, oh, you said the training. I was thinking about that just a minute ago. Just a few weeks of training, they throw them in a battle. I think our soldiers today are much better trained, and probably those are weeded out.
Yeah,
Those-
that's, cause especially with like drafts and like wars where you have to conscript, a lot of it is like this, you get more people that don't want to fight, so you get more people that run away. Like it's sort of a big problem.
That's an argument against ever having a draft,
Yeah.
because a volunteer army is much better army than, the Vietnam Army was not as good as the Afghan Army and the Iraq Army for that very reason. Courtney?
I think kind of going off what Eli said and what some other people have said, I really did not find Henry to be like a likable character, but I do think that it's important the way that this author has made him behave, because you see him sort of contrasted with his friend Wilson, because at the beginning both of them were just like kids who didn't know what to expect, and they both had their own kind of illusions of grandeur. And I think as the real terrible stuff happened, I think what it's trying to do is it's like nobody knows what to expect. Everybody thinks that everyone else knows what to do, but nobody does. Nobody knows how to react when you're, probably just gonna get killed, or when your friends are getting killed. So he's not a likable character to me, but I also think it's like, I don't know how I would react in his position. I might do the exact same thing. And I think that that's important to have stories like that instead of just stories like where everybody is a hero, because, I mean, you can kind of see in Henry's character why everybody being a hero is a problem, because then he thinks, oh, going into war is this like big glamorous thing, when he actually gets there, he's like, it's not, it's terrible.
I like that. Sometimes he's walking, he calls it a blue demonstration, and he's walking like 4 abreast, and there's really nowhere to go. And when you're lined up and they would fight in lines, you got shoulder to shoulder, and then there are probably people behind you. You would fire, you would step back maybe, they would step up. So it's really hard to run. They try to make it so it's hard to run, but if you want to run, you're going to find a way to do it. That's interesting, because this is about the psychology of courage. I get glimpses in here. You got 600 men lined up in blue uniforms with red, white, and blue flags. Beautiful sky. You got these gray guys or brown guys, because they often wore the butternut color, that kind of tan color instead of gray. The Confederate. I would imagine, wow, this is kind of exciting. Then you realize you're going to get hit and your buddy gets shot, but I can imagine that would keep you there too. Wow, I'm part of something really big. I'm trying to think of the psychology, like you and I are trying to figure, would we run or would we stand? That psychology might make me want to stand. Wow, this is great. I wouldn't want to miss this for the world. And then, of course, other things like your buddy getting shot or you getting shot would change your opinion quickly. Yes.
So I kind of found Henry's indecisiveness interesting, because at first, like Emily said, he enlisted, so he wanted to go towards the fight. And as soon as he actually gets to the fight, he runs away. But then, like right after he runs away, he sees the corpse, and then he goes right back to the front lines.
Right back.
And then right when he gets to the front lines, he joins the wounded who are going back to the rear of the army. And then he goes all the way back to his regiment again. So it's like this weird back and forth, because he can't ever seem to like make up his mind between whether he really wants to stay or whether he really wants to run away.
And you could make a real argument that none of these decisions are made voluntarily. Did he decide to go? Anybody gonna talk about his going back? So I don't want to steal it, but his going back, were you gonna talk about it? Okay. Notice when he goes back to his regiment, does he do voluntarily? Does he walk up to them and say, man, I blew it, I'm back? How did he get back there?
The nice soldier like led him back there.
He got knocked on the head and then he got unconscious. He didn't even want that. And then somebody took him back. He could have never found him if he wanted to, in the middle of the day. But it was the middle of the night and this guy takes him back. And it's sort of this naturalistic attitude of the author that most of life things happen to you that you don't control. And so I think that's really interesting. Vinny, when he does go back, he really didn't do that on his own. He was kind of forced to go back. This guy just dragged him there.
Yeah, well, I agree with like what most people have been saying about Henry's indecisiveness, but I think it's just interesting how like even though this is a book about the Civil War, I feel like the emphasis isn't really on the war, but it's about like the thoughts of all the men fighting the war.
Like Cordy was talking about the psychology. of it.
Right. And so I think it's interesting just because like questions of like whether there's real patriotism in the soldiers or whether it's like peer pressure or like this idea of dignity. And I think it's just interesting to like that's like what the focus is. Like he keeps going back and forth, like whether he's going to be a coward in retreat or if he's going to man up and fight. And I think it's just interesting like to see like what their real motives are in fighting.
It's really important that, again, that the view of this author is not so much that we have patriotism and courage, but maybe it's that we do things kind of we're forced to do everything. Remember being a naturalist, so maybe courage is just, I've heard people say this, is you're too afraid to run. I don't want to be a coward, so I'm standing here risking my life because I'd rather die than be called a coward. That's kind of a fear. Fear motivates you to fight rather than to run. Yes, Mary.
I just found it interesting, like the contrast between Henry's idea of the ideal soldier and, I guess the one suggested by the author. Like in the beginning, he's very obsessed with the idea of courage versus like cowardice. And I guess in the beginning he referenced a lot of like Greek myth and Greek gods and like how kind of larger than life he thinks the real or ideal soldier should be, where they should go in and like just have these epic, feats of glory and just like fight really well. But I think what the author's suggesting with Wilson is that the ideal soldier isn't really that spectacular, but instead he's just like steadfast and willing to kind of like quietly give up his life as opposed to like make a show out of it almost. And so I just thought that was interesting that he was kind of emphasizing the quiet bravery of Wilson as opposed to the like bold
Yeah.
courage.
There's several things. One thing that came to mind was about, and I'm trying to grab it again when you were talking. Think about lining up in a long line, shooting against other guys that are coming at you in a long line. You probably would never see the bullet that killed you. So even your death is anonymous. And even when and I don't know I can't remember how far you've gone, but it's times they realize that what we just did was extremely insignificant. So it seems like a lot of war is insignificant. It'll never get in the history book what we did here. And I get killed by a bullet. I didn't even see the guy who shot me. That's not very glorious. It's not like Hector and Achilles fighting man to man, and you got two armies watching you, and man, the winner is going to take all the glory. There's no glory in getting shot by some guy way over there. I can't even see him. And that seems to be that's part of the psychology of the book also. The motives are about war. You're talking about motives of fire. It's about glory. What's the glory in that? Yes.
One thing I really liked reading about was, I thought it was interesting how Henry perceived the soldiers around him.
Who did?
How Henry perceived the soldiers
All right.
around him, like especially the ones who didn't run away. How it wasn't like he was impressed with them, it was almost like he was mad at them for staying and holding their ground. And so like we can look at that and be like, okay, he's a terrible person for thinking that, but I think we can all sort of feel that. Like my first thought was like, that's sort of how I feel at PE. If I drop a pass and then I see someone else catch one, it's like, oh that guy. And then if they drop one, it's like, okay, I feel a little better now. And so I think we can all sort of identify with that, being upset with people for doing their job correctly.
This is funny, just the other day, forgive me, personal, but the first week of pads, when I was a senior, they lined one of us up against one of the others there, and so this offensive lineman, he outweighed me, and my job was to fend off, the whole team is around you watching, and so my job was to fend off this guy's block. There was a guy with a ball behind him who was gonna run, and my job was to fend off the block and tackle the guy. He knocked me flat on my you-know-what, and I was humiliated. And to this day, I can still, that's crazy. Get over it, Mr. Powell, come on, it's been 50 years. But I still remember, I should have congratulated the guy, and I may have, but I didn't feel it, because I felt humiliated. I felt he bested me. And we ended up doing pretty well that year, but we did it as a team. But it was very personal. Like, I didn't want to be defeated by this guy, that one chance. We didn't get to do it twice, I only had one shot at it. Can I ask you a couple questions in the 6 minutes about what role does Henry's need to be around other people? We already talked about his wanting their confirmation and affirmation and so forth, but what role in growing up for Henry and for you and me do other people play in that? Like, does the book show a pattern of Henry's growth is partly result of his interacting, not running away like he did from the front lines and when he did, when he would go think before they went, but his growth is in large part due to his interactions with other people and what those other people do for him. Do you see where the question I'm asking? Since we're going sort of using this formula, separation, initiation, and I forget what the last one is. What's the last one? But anyway, those two that's where we are. But can you make a case? You know what I'm asking? Well, let me give you an example. When he ran back to the front lines, that was to get away from that corpse. But could you see that psychologically he would rather die with other people than live with this corpse? Kind of a need. And what role does that have in our growing up? Your understanding the role other people have, your need for other people, in a properly, understood. Does that help? Because I think that is a theme. If we had read this together, I think I could have helped you see that better. And the second example fits that too. What role did Jim Conklin have? And Henry's not grown up yet, but he's certainly better off now that he's back with his unit. He's back with his unit. That's another example of what I'm saying. He could have never been a hero alone on that battlefield. He has now the opportunity to be a hero now that he's back. But what role did Jim Conklin have to do with his going back? Even though he didn't consciously decide to go back, it still played a role. What role does Jim Conklin's death have to do with it? All right, let me ask you to go one place. I'll try this from another angle. Look at the last sentence of chapter 9. That would be a great question to ask you when we do write, so we need to understand the question and the answer. The last few words, the youth turned, you see that, the last several lines? By the way, pause right there. A few paragraphs earlier it said, Jim Conklin, his tall figure stretched itself to full heights. There was a slight rending sound, then it began to swing forward, slow and straight, the manner of a falling tree. A swift muscular contortion made the left shoulder strike the ground first. Remember, he died on a hill. Remember his name, Jim Conklin, his initials are J.C. The youth turned with sudden, livid rage toward, this is after Jim dies. What happens here that has not yet happened in the book? He turns, he shook his fist. He's like, remember we're using that as the front line. He turns and does this. Seems about to deliver a philippic, which is a speech of condemnation. He says the word hell like he's cursing at them. Then it says the red sun was pasted in the sky like a wafer. Tell me what all that means. wafer. Let's just get to that. That's the odd word. The red sign, I get it. Pasted, I don't get that. Wafer, what is a wafer? Yeah, I've got some in my, I don't know why I like vanilla wafers. They're about as bland as you can get with nothing on them. That's just one of those strange things, you know, why would you like that stuff? But I know what it looks like, and that's what I think of when I look at that sentence. It's round, it says the sun's round. But what's a wafer? Something you eat. Tell me about a wafer. We got 3 minutes now. I don't want to tell you. I think you can figure that out.
Doesn't it like symbolize the body of Christ?
Yes, how so?
Well, like when you eat the wafer, you're.
Absolutely. The communion. So his initials are JC. He dies on a hill. How does he die for Henry? In fact, how does he die for every soldier that dies in combat dies for other people? But how does he specifically die for Henry? How do you see his death already being changing Henry? What has he done here that I don't think he's done yet in the war? He turned and yes. He turns. He had a livid rage toward the battlefield. Who's at the other end of the battlefield? That way. This is the front lines. Who's over there? Those are the front lines. Who's the furthest over there? The enemy, right? So he turns to them, he shakes his hand, and then it mentions Jesus. What does he do for the first time? Have you seen him get angry at the enemy yet? Tell me who's gotten angry at. Gotten angry at himself, angry at his troops, angry at the lieutenant. But he's never gotten angry at the enemy. And it seems to me, if you're going to be a good soldier, you better know who to hate. You better know who to get angry at. So the death of Jim Conklin, I think this is one of the first steps, but not the first step. In his anger is now directed toward the enemy. Plus, you notice that he's with other people. He goes with those people. You mentioned it, it was Kieran, talking about how he goes from being alone to other people and back and forth. I think that's something you need to be looking at as you keep reading. We'll look more at this. It says he's not going to grow until he knows he has to be with other people. We'll get to that later. Read the rest of the book on Friday, and we'll see you. Good discussion, as always. Yeah, you should have seen the other guy. Just stare at him.
I thought he could punch him. He got really angry. I thought he could win the fight.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop that. Right, I'm gonna drop it. I don't know why. Is it blank there?
Yes.
Well, that's fine, as long as there's a blank.
Okay, I was just like, like if I needed to do anything.
No, I didn't mean to put a 1 or a 0 or anything.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I wanted.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, this is about.
Yeah.